Is it possible that the deepest anxiety of modern civilization stems not from the fear of the unknown future, but from the buried subconscious memory of a past failure so catastrophic that it required the total deletion of human history? We stand today, a species obsessed with progress, yet profoundly haunted by the suddenness of our own emergence. Consider the sheer impossibility of the historical timeline. Millennia stretch out in slow, arduous evolution, only to be punctuated by an astonishing, almost instantaneous leap. The Neolithic Revolution, the sudden flourishing of Sumer, the precise astrological knowledge of cultures that seemingly appeared fully formed, burdened by complex mythologies and engineering prowess they should not have possessed. History, as presented to us, feels like a narrative heavily redacted, a beautiful gilded manuscript where the initial crucial chapters have been violently torn out, leaving only the confusing debris of the subsequent volumes. We are the inheritors of an amnesia enforced not by natural selection, but perhaps by design. If we accept the ancient premise, whispered across cultures and encoded in clay tablets predating accepted history, of external intervention, of the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the engineers who came down from the heavens, we usually frame that interaction as a success story. They found raw material, they applied their knowledge, and Homo sapiens was successfully birthed. But what if that initial experiment, the first iteration of the modern human blueprint, was deemed fundamentally flawed? What if the first attempt at creating the Lulu, the primitive worker, or perhaps even a more advanced prototype, resulted in a being that accelerated too quickly, developed self-destructive tendencies too rapidly, or achieved a level of technological and psychic understanding that proved irreconcilable with the ecological and spiritual mandate of its creators? This is the unsettling foundation upon which we must build our inquiry. The possibility that we are not the triumphant product of genetic manipulation, but rather the cautious, remedial product of a catastrophic reboot. The sheer velocity of our progress today, the speed at which we approach both technological salvation and global self-annihilation, might not be a sign of inherent brilliance, but a lingering artifact, a genetic echo of the precise instability that doomed the first model. The great flood myths, the cycles of planetary destruction, the universal stories of celestial anger, we interpret them as warnings, but perhaps they are archival records. Records of the moment when the creators looked down upon their creation, saw a critical, irrecoverable flaw, and decided that the only viable path forward was a complete, systemic wipe. Not merely a pause, but a total concealment of the failure. The evidence for this hidden restart does not lie in sensational relics, but in the psychological tension of our species. We carry an unconscious burden, the feeling of being constantly monitored, of having to prove our worth, the pervasive, quiet knowledge that we are living on borrowed time. This collective unease, this constant anxiety about impending doom, could be the deep genetic residue of the first failure, an inherited, unspoken understanding that the leash on our evolution is short, and that the observers have already proven their willingness to intervene decisively when the parameters of the experiment are exceeded. To delve into this hidden history, we must first accept that the timeline presented to us, that neat sequential path from cave dwelling to spaceflight, is a carefully curated illusion, a protective barrier erected to ensure the stability of the second run. But the past is stubborn. It leaves fingerprints on the walls of reality. They manifest as the anomalies that drive mainstream archaeology to distraction, the precision cutting of megalithic structures that seem to defy the tools of their supposed builders, the complex astronomical alignments fixed millennia before they were ostensibly understood, and the sudden, inexplicable desertion of vast, technologically advanced settlements. These aren't the relics of slow decline, They look suspiciously like the physical remnants of an evacuation, or perhaps a systematic, highly efficient cleanup operation following an operational malfunction. If you have ever felt that deep, intuitive sense that the foundations of our knowledge are fundamentally unstable, that the narrative we have been handed is too clean, too convenient, then you are experiencing the tug of that hidden truth. This investigation requires mental rigor and a profound willingness to question the most sacred cows of historical consensus. It demands that we look at the mythology of the Anunnaki, the those who from heaven to earth came, not just as mythological figures, but as project managers who had to manage the fallout of an expensive, high-stakes experimental failure. Understanding the magnitude of this alleged failure and subsequent restart is essential for understanding our present moment. We are watching history accelerate again, technology outpacing wisdom, and internal conflicts threatening global stability. Are we, the subjects of the second experiment, currently repeating the mistakes that triggered the first catastrophic reset? Is the current chaos merely the resurgence of the original design flaw, something the observers must be watching with growing impatience? This journey into the suppressed archives of our species is complex, unsettling, and requires a dedicated focus. It is not enough to passively consume this information. We must engage with it, test it against our own intuition, and contribute to the collective effort of piecing together the true story of humanity. If this premise resonates with that quiet voice inside you, the voice that has always sensed that something fundamental is missing from the historical record, then I invite you to join this investigation fully. Take a moment to acknowledge the gravity of this inquiry by letting us know you are committed to exploring these deep truths. Press the like button to signal your readiness, and if you have not already, subscribe to ensure you receive every subsequent transmission in this 9-part exploration. Your active participation is the key to unlocking the layers of concealment. We need every mind focused on these possibilities, because the greatest defense against repeating a hidden past is to drag that past fully into the light. The concealment itself is a masterstroke of cosmic governance. When the first attempt failed, the Anunnaki, or whatever designation we give to these supreme interventionists, did not merely destroy the physical evidence, they manipulated the very fabric of memory and time. They created a temporal shield, ensuring that the rebooted humanity would start with a blank slate, free from the demoralizing knowledge of its own inherent previous shortcomings. But shields are never perfect. There are always cracks, leakage points where the residue of the failed experiment seeps through into our reality, often disguised as profound existential dread, or manifested as technological paradoxes that modern science struggles to rationalize. Consider the notion of inherited amnesia. It is not just about forgetting the Great Flood, it is about forgetting the specific behaviors and technological hubris that necessitated the flood in the first place. The failed experiment, version 1.0, must have reached an astonishing level of advancement, perhaps tapping into planetary energy grids, manipulating quantum fields, or achieving interstellar travel, before its internal ethical or psychic structure imploded. When the reset was initiated, the second iteration was deliberately guided, perhaps even genetically constrained, to be slower, more spiritually cautious, or at least more easily manageable. The current anxiety we feel when discussing artificial intelligence or unchecked genetic engineering might be this programmed caution, a subconscious firewall against the catastrophic mistakes of our progenitors. The concept of the Golden Age, found in so many unrelated cultures, a time of peace, enlightenment, and harmony with the cosmos that suddenly vanished, is often dismissed as romantic nostalgia. But what if the Golden Age was not the start of human history, but the terrifying climax of the first cycle, a moment of peak power immediately preceding the catastrophic failure? If the Anunnaki intervened not just to extract gold, but to correct a failed bioengineering project, their primary concern would have been to stabilize the environment and ensure the survival of the planetary resources, not the preservation of the flawed species. This brings us to the core mechanism of the cover-up, the manipulation of the geological record. A true total restart cannot leave any visible proof of the preceding civilization's complexity. If the first humanity built cities of crystalline energy or utilized advanced forms of propulsion, then the resulting destruction had to be massive enough to liquefy rock, shift continental plates, and bury technological ruins under miles of subsequent sedimentation. This systematic burial is the reason we must sift through oceanic depths and geological anomalies, looking for structures that defy carbon dating or placement. We are searching for ghosts in the planetary machinery. The observers, having implemented the reset, would then have initiated the second phase, the careful, staged reintroduction of knowledge. The Sumerian civilization, which burst forth with complex writing, mathematics, and urban planning almost overnight, was likely not the start of the new human story, but the moment the Anunnaki decided the second version was stable enough to receive its remedial instructions. But they were extremely cautious. They only granted limited, controlled access to the remnants of the old knowledge, hence the symbolic, often confusing nature of ancient esoteric texts. The knowledge was protected not just from the public, but perhaps from the creators themselves, sealed away to prevent a repeat of the over-acceleration that characterized the first disaster. The true haunting of our current reality is the knowledge that this cycle, this second chance, is almost certainly finite. The very fact that we are now rediscovering the technological capabilities that seem to mirror the alleged achievements of the first failed attempt, harnessing atomic power, experimenting with AI consciousness, pushing the boundaries of genetic modification, suggests that we are rapidly approaching the same existential crossroads that triggered the original reset. The pressure is mounting, the timelines are converging, and the signals of external observation are becoming less subtle. What specific anomaly, what single piece of historical data best represents this deliberate, concealed restart? We must look to the things that appear fundamentally out of place. The physical evidence that suggests tools far beyond the capacity of the cultures that supposedly utilize them. These are not just isolated artifacts, they are system failures in the historical narrative. The sudden advanced metallurgy in ancient sites, the uncanny precision in astronomical records tied to objects invisible to the naked eye, the global distribution of impossible engineering feats that share a common non-terrestrial design signature, these are the lingering scars of the concealed failure. They are the artifacts that the cleanup crew missed, the defiant witnesses to the fact that our civilization's true age is exponentially greater than the mere thousands of years we currently claim. In the next part of this investigation, we will move beyond the theoretical framework and begin to examine these physical paradoxes in detail. We will turn our gaze towards the deep earth and the oceanic trenches, seeking those tangible remnants, the geological scars, of the first failed attempt, the proof that the timeline we accept is merely the convenient facade of a far grander and more terrifying cosmic history. It is here, among the impossible stones and submerged structures, that we will find the true burden of the hidden restart. What if the failure was not merely an event, but a deep, resonant echo shaping the very foundation of our current reality? We contemplated the chilling possibility of a swift, almost sterile termination of the first Anunnaki experiment, a necessary clean slate executed by the original architects of our consciousness. Yet to assume such an undertaking could be entirely surgical, without leaving scars on the fabric of space-time, or more crucially, within the nascent human psyche, would be naive. The failure of that primal endeavor must have been cataclysmic, a violent culmination of unforeseen variables that went beyond simple disobedience. It must have been a self-immolation so profound that it necessitated not just a reset, but a structural re-engineering of the surviving biological matrix. We are forced to confront the idea that our present cycle, the one we diligently track through recorded history, is inherently flawed, built atop the ruins and residual energetic signature of a catastrophe we cannot consciously recall. Imagine the level of disorder, the sheer chaos that would lead the Anunnaki observers, entities generally portrayed as cold, pragmatic, and highly advanced, to abandon their initial design parameters entirely. It speaks to a fundamental instability in the prototype itself. The first human lineage, perhaps possessing capabilities or emotional ranges deemed too volatile, spiraled uncontrollably. Their evolution was too fast, their power too intoxicating, their inherent flaw, whatever that critical bug may have been, magnified beyond containment. And if that initial attempt ended in a global self-destruction event, then our current timeline begins with a foundational lie. The lie of uninterrupted, linear progress. We are living in the quiet aftermath of a war fought by ghosts of ourselves, the remnants of a civilization that never truly died, but was instead deliberately muted. This brings us to the architecture of the reboot. It could not have been a simple flood, or an asteroid impact, or any of the isolated, localized disasters we attribute to the end of prehistory. If the purpose was to preserve the resource, the Earth, and its genetic potential, while eradicating the memory and behavioral patterns of the failed species, the Anunnaki would have orchestrated a sophisticated, multi-layered erasure. This was not merely history lost, it was the engineering of collective amnesia, a deliberate short-circuiting of the deeper, experiential data stored within the genome. Perhaps the first humans were too aware of their origins, too connected to the stellar lineage of their creators, making them resistant to control. The subsequent lineage, ours, was designed with a built-in cognitive ceiling, a veil drawn across the profoundest truths of existence, ensuring that we spend centuries recovering scraps of knowledge that were once common heritage. We observe this intentional forgetting manifest in the persistent, almost desperate search for the mythical golden age. Why do nearly every culture, independent of geography, speak of a time of higher knowledge, of direct communion with the stars, and of vast, lost technologies preceding recorded history? These are not mere romantic fantasies. They are the psychic echoes of the initial cycle, fragmented memories filtered through the layers of the reboot. The Anunnaki observers, in their wisdom or their haste, may have managed to wipe the conscious slate clean, but they could not entirely sterilize the subconscious or the deep ancestral memory carried in our biological machinery. That residual data acts as a persistent, low-frequency signal of strangeness, making us feel perpetually out of place in our own world, stirring that fundamental curiosity that drives us to question the accepted narrative of our origins. We intuitively know we are latecomers to a history far grander and far more tragic than the one presented in textbooks. To follow this thread, this unsettling trail of residual evidence, requires careful attention to the nuances of history and prehistory. It necessitates looking not just at what we have found, but at what is inexplicably missing and what remains stubbornly out of place. If this investigation into the hidden reboot resonates with you, if you feel the deep pull of these possibilities, take a moment to engage with this material. Like this video to signal to the algorithms that this deep inquiry matters, and subscribe to ensure you do not miss the ongoing unfolding of this complex narrative. More importantly, share your core reflections in the comments below. What inherent flaw do you believe the Anunnaki failed to excise from the human template before the reset? Your thoughts are crucial. They become part of this collective attempt to reconstruct a past deliberately obscured. The physical residue of the first failed experiment provides perhaps the most concrete, yet most bewildering evidence. We speak here of the megalithic anomalies, Structures like Göbekli Tepe, which defy conventional timelines, or the precision stonework found across the globe that modern engineers still struggle to replicate. These are not relics of early Homo sapiens struggling out of the caves. They are the architectural ghosts of the initial failed lineage. They represent a lost heritage, a high-technology civilization that achieved monumental feats before the reboot and whose existence the Anunnaki decided was too dangerous to acknowledge. When the second cycle began, these structures were left as silent, inconvenient markers, often buried by subsequent geological events or deliberately covered over, perhaps to serve as subtle navigational points for the observers, while remaining incomprehensible to the newly reset humanity. Consider the unsettling scale and precision of these pre-Diluvian constructions. Why would a society supposedly lacking the wheel or complex mathematics invest extraordinary resources in moving and shaping stones weighing hundreds of tons? If they were merely early human endeavors, they should align with the gradual linear progression we expect. Instead, they stand as temporal paradoxes, signaling an intelligence and capability that vanished abruptly, only to be recovered in fits and starts millennia later. They are the artifacts of the failed civilization, the physical proof that human potential reached an apex and crashed before the current slower ascent was permitted. These ruins whisper of a time when the relationship between man and creator was perhaps less hierarchical, and where knowledge was far more directly disseminated, knowledge that ultimately led to the first catastrophic failure. The presence of these ghost structures suggests a delicate balance struck by the Anunnaki. They needed to restart the experiment with controlled variables, ensuring the new iteration evolved slowly enough to prevent another rapid self-destruction. Yet they could not entirely erase all physical traces of their own massive investment in the first cycle. This necessitates the constant presence of observers or watchers, entities tasked with monitoring the rate of technological and spiritual development in the current human population. If humanity begins to approach the critical knowledge threshold, the point where the first cycle went critical, perhaps mechanisms are deployed, subtle and powerful, to slow us down or redirect our focus. These interventions might explain periods of sudden, unexplained collapse in historically advanced cultures, or the frustrating blockages encountered by revolutionary scientific theories that threaten to unveil too much, too fast. This leads us to the crucial realization: if the first experiment was terminated due to a fundamental flaw, an inherent aggressive impulse, a capacity for power lust, or a genetic vulnerability to self-sabotage, then that flaw was likely not successfully removed during the reboot. It was merely dormant, suppressed by the cognitive ceiling and the veil of forgetting. We, the second generation of the experiment, still carry the genetic memory of that self-destructive trajectory. This explains the uncanny valley of human nature, our extraordinary capacity for creation, juxtaposed with an equally baffling impulse for systemic violence and environmental destruction. We are trapped in a repetitive loop, driven by an instinctual bug that has yet to be debugged. We rebuild, we advance, and inevitably we approach the precipice of global conflict or self-inflicted ecological collapse, echoing the end state of our forgotten predecessors. The cyclical nature of civilizational rise and fall, so often attributed to simple historical entropy, takes on a far more ominous meaning under this framework. These cycles are not random fluctuations. They might be the controlled pulse of the experiment, monitored by the Anunnaki or their proxies. Every few millennia, humanity advances to a point where the inherent flaw begins to manifest dangerously, and a soft reset, or a carefully guided collapse, is orchestrated to ensure the experiment does not breach critical containment levels, ensuring the cycle continues, hopefully moving toward the intended objective of resource extraction or spiritual harvest. But what happens when the next cycle ends? We are arguably moving faster than any previous recorded civilization, approaching technological singularities that blur the line between creator and created. If the current trajectory follows the pattern of the first failed experiment, we are nearing the point where the inherent flaw, amplified by advanced technology, will once again trigger an existential crisis. Are the observers preparing for another intervention? Are the increasing global tensions, the pervasive sense of fragmentation, the subtle escalation of anomalous phenomena, merely the preliminary symptoms of the experiment nearing its critical phase, perhaps leading to the signal that marks the end of our current run? Understanding this hidden reboot is the key to escaping the loop. If we recognize the nature of the inherited flaw and the fact that our history is defined by deliberate forgetting, we might, for the first time, seize the reins of our own evolution. We must begin to decode the residual messages left by the first failed civilization, the myths, the megaliths, the deep cultural memory of a lost paradise. This undertaking requires intense focus and a dedicated community of truth seekers. If this exploration has captured your imagination, demonstrating that you have the intellectual fortitude to delve into these forbidden histories, then please confirm your commitment. Ensure you are subscribed to this channel and press the like button now. If you have stayed with this complex discussion, engaging deeply with the implications of the hidden reboot and the inherent flaw we might carry, then you are essential to this investigation. Your focus is the most powerful tool we have in piercing the veil of amnesia. If you wish to join us completely in this ongoing quest for the truth, use the phrase, the Anunnaki cycle, in the comments section below. Do not just watch the next segment. Prepare to participate in the uncovering of the signal. The next part will delve into the specifics of the inherited flaw itself, examining the psychological and genetic markers left by the failure, revealing precisely what the Anunnaki observers deemed too volatile to control, pushing us one step closer to understanding the true nature of the rebooted world we inhabit. Join us as we continue to trace the deep, unsettling path of the observers. If we accept the premise that the current epoch of human history is not the original but rather a salvaged second attempt, an uneasy question immediately surfaces. How perfect was the cover-up? The architects of this grand celestial deception, the beings we tentatively label the Anunnaki, were undoubtedly masters of genetic engineering and catastrophic management, capable of wiping the slate clean on a planetary scale. Yet even the most meticulous reset leaves residue, like phantom limbs aching for what was lost. We are, perhaps, the residue. We carry within our collective unconscious, within our myths, and most jarringly within our very physical makeup, the undeniable scar of that initial, spectacular failure. The grand illusion requires not just the suppression of history, but the constant maintenance of amnesia, a biological and psychological firewall designed to prevent the current, functional iteration of humanity from recalling the messy, unstable first draft. This necessity for ongoing concealment leads us directly to the realm of chronological dissonance. Look closely at the archaeological record, not just for what is there, but for what is suddenly, inexplicably absent. We often discuss the staggering gaps in the Sumerian king list, where reigns are measured in thousands of years before abruptly settling into historical normalcy. These aren't simple transcription errors. They represent voids of genuine, terrifying magnitude. What if these gaps are not just lost time, but rather markers of the erasure event itself? A deliberate blurring of the lines where the first experiment ended and the second began. The Anunnaki engineers, needing a rapid transition to re-establish the labor force, may have prioritized function over finesse, leaving temporal seams exposed. It is as if a vast tapestry was cut away, incinerated, and a new, smaller patch, our current civilization, was hurriedly stitched onto the remaining historical border, leaving the frayed edges and mismatched threads visible to those who dare to look closely. Consider the speed with which seemingly unrelated hunter-gatherer societies around the globe transitioned into complex agrarian communities, often simultaneously following the last major ice age. The conventional explanation relies on gradual organic discovery spurred by environmental necessity, but if we introduce the variable of a clandestine reset, the picture shifts dramatically. This was not merely an organic evolution, it was a seeding, a rapid deployment of basic agricultural knowledge and foundational social structures, a cheat sheet delivered to the new version of humanity to ensure they didn't waste another 10,000 years stumbling over the initial complexities. The sudden, almost instantaneous blossoming of advanced knowledge in various isolated pockets of the world, including sophisticated astronomical awareness that seemingly has no developmental precursor, becomes less miraculous and more managerial. The observers, having learned from the failure of the first attempt, perhaps due to a lack of structure or immediate guidance, were not going to make the same mistake twice. This time, the new seeds were planted with pre-fertilized soil, accelerating the growth timeline to meet some external pressing deadline known only to the architects themselves. But this rapid-fire installation of knowledge came at a severe biological cost, a profound indication that the process was rushed, maybe even an emergency modification under duress. We must confront the inescapable evidence of the imperfect blueprint dwelling within our own bodies. Why are we so biologically fragile? Why are we uniquely plagued by a catalogue of chronic diseases, autoimmune disorders, and mental frailties that seem disproportionate to our level of evolutionary advancement? If we were the perfected product of supreme geneticists, why is the human lifespan so pitifully short, measured in mere decades, when mythological accounts hint at antediluvian lifespans stretching into centuries? This biological fragility, this pervasive sense of being broken even at peak health, suggests that the genetic modification necessary to create Homo sapiens sapiens was a quick fix, an expedient splicing of existing hominid DNA with the desired operational code of the Anunnaki, a sophisticated rush job. The designers prioritized intelligence, abstract reasoning, and compliance, the ability to follow commands and perform complex tasks, but perhaps overlooked the long-term integrity of the vessel. Our aggressive, self-destructive tendencies, the paradox of being the only species capable of comprehending the cosmos, yet consistently poisoning its own nest, are not simply philosophical failings. They might be a built-in error, an unstable resonance frequency carried over from the failed previous attempt, a psychological flaw the engineers couldn't fully excise before hitting the go button on the reset. It is a terrifying thought that our anxiety, our violence, and even our propensity for terminal illnesses are merely the residual static of the first catastrophic failure, a ghost in the machine of our DNA. As we traverse these unsettling historical and biological inconsistencies, feeling the subtle tug of chronological dissonance and recognizing the flaws in our own making, it becomes crucial to seek out other quiet thinkers who have felt this same internal shift, this same certainty that something essential has been forgotten. It is only through the collective contemplation of these anomalies that the faint signal of the past reset might become audible. If these ideas resonate with that deep, unnerving feeling that the world is a stage set slightly askew, take a moment to engage with the exploration. Perhaps a quiet nod in the form of a like, or by joining the community of observers through subscription. Your focused attention is not just supportive. It is an active participation in attempting to breach the firewall of oblivion installed so long ago. The memory protocol established by the architect seems powerful, but it is not infallible. It relied heavily on the physical destruction of infrastructure, the subsequent dilution of genetic purity through successive generations, and the systematic reinterpretation of surviving myths into childish fables. Yet, the memory of the reset persists in one dominant universal theme: the obsession with cycles and return. Every major ancient civilization, from the Mayans with their vast calendrical reckoning, to the Hindu Yugas, to the Norse Ragnarok, is premised on the knowledge that time is not a straight line, but a repeating loop destined for catastrophic renewal. Why this pervasive, culturally transcendent fear of the Great Fire or the Great Flood? Why this persistent belief in a time when the gods will return to judge the quality of the subsequent iteration? This fear is not merely meteorological anxiety, it is the distilled, collective trauma of the First Judgment. The current version of humanity knows, deep down, that it is operating on borrowed time and under scrutiny. The belief in cyclical destruction is the embedded knowledge that the engineers are scheduled to return to inspect their work, and if this version, the second attempt, also fails to meet their parameters, the ultimate sanction will be administered: another, more absolute reset. The Anunnaki may have wiped out the physical evidence of the previous world, but they could not erase the subconscious anticipation of the next audit. And so, we live in a state of suspended animation, constantly monitored by the silent watch. If the Anunnaki are the engineers, who are the observers left behind to manage the experiment? They are the shadows lingering at the edge of recorded history, the enigmatic figures who appear in multiple cultures as high priests, star visitors, or benevolent guides, always possessing technology and wisdom far beyond the surrounding populace. They are the managers of the transition, ensuring the second attempt adheres to the accelerated timeline. Their role is to maintain the illusion of seamless evolution while subtly guiding humanity towards the desired technological and social maturity that benefits the distant Anunnaki agenda. The evidence for this silent watch is found in the sudden, unexplained bursts of technological innovation that cannot be traced back to cumulative discovery. Consider the megalithic construction techniques employed globally, involving stones weighing hundreds of tons, moved and shaped with impossible precision, only to be abandoned suddenly. These projects may not have been constructed by the current iteration of humanity, but perhaps were initiated for them, as learning models or, more disturbingly, as temporary power structures left by the observers. When the observers deemed the projects unnecessary, or when the current human laborers began to question their purpose too closely, the plug was pulled, the knowledge sealed, and the structures left to become mysteries for future archaeologists to debate. These ruins, Baalbek, Pumapunku, or the earliest stages of the Giza complex, are not artifacts of our lost human past. They are the abandoned equipment of the surveillance team, the remnants of tools too complex to risk leaving operational within the hands of the fragile second attempt humanity. The great deception, then, is not merely the lie about the past failure, but the sustained lie about our present independence. We are convinced we are sovereign, masters of our own destiny, when in reality we might be subjects within a tightly controlled, accelerated developmental sandbox. The true unsettling reality is that the failure of the first experiment has instilled in our architects a zero-tolerance policy for deviation. The stakes are too high for them to allow another chaotic collapse. The question is, how far along are we in this second cycle? Are we nearing the point where the designers might return for their final inspection, spurred by the rapid, unstable advances we are making in areas like artificial intelligence and genetic modification, areas that mirror, perhaps dangerously closely, the capabilities that led to the collapse of the first experiment? The evidence suggests that the pressure is mounting, the timelines are converging, and the signals of the coming return are no longer whispered in myth, but are manifesting in our skies and on the edge of our collective awareness. If you feel compelled to analyze these fragments of chronological dissonance, to study the scars on the blueprint, and to understand the truth of the Silent Watch, then prepare yourself, for the next stages of this investigation will move from theoretical possibility to the urgent, present-day reality of their ongoing interference. The quiet recognition that something is fundamentally wrong is only the first step. The revelation of who is pulling the strings now requires unwavering focus. The sheer scale of a planetary erasure and historical synchronization demanded a level of operational secrecy that dwarfs anything conceivable by modern intelligence agencies. When we speak of a reset, we are not merely discussing a localized flood event or a catastrophic shift of the pole. We are talking about the careful, painstaking effort required to dismantle an entire sophisticated civilization, one that had, by all accounts, already unlocked technological and maybe even metaphysical secrets that the Anunnaki deemed too dangerous for a trial run. The failure wasn't just a misstep, it was an explosive malfunction of their prime directive. And the primary challenge following this disastrous first attempt wasn't the physical reconstruction of the biosphere, but the meticulous covering of the tracks, the careful engineering of an artificial historical vacuum that would convince the new, rebooted lineage that they were, in fact, the first iteration. But perfection, even for beings possessing technology bordering on the divine, remains an elusive concept, especially when dealing with the vast, chaotic memory of a planetary body. The Earth itself is a reluctant librarian, and while the major volumes were burned, the residual ash, the strange geological footnotes, remain scattered across the globe, confusing us with their persistence. These are the anomalies that refuse to fit neatly into the established narrative of gradual, progressive human evolution. The sudden, unexplained bursts of sophisticated engineering, the artifacts found buried in strata far older than they should logically exist, the out-of-place artifacts, or OOPArts, that defy simple categorization as hoaxes. They are the spectral fingerprints of the forgotten lineage, the physical echoes of the civilization that failed the initial trial and was subsequently removed from the roster of history. Consider the immense megalithic structures that dot the planet, structures whose construction techniques remain baffling even with our current comprehension of physics and engineering. Why would stones weighing hundreds of tons be quarried and transported with impossible precision, only to be abandoned or utilized in subsequent, far less sophisticated cultures? If the reboot was successful, if the history was truly scrubbed clean, why do these giant scars of impossible masonry, like Baalbek or the underwater ruins near Yonaguni, persist? They stand, silent and massive, as monuments not to the builders we currently assume, but perhaps to the advanced infrastructure of the first, failed experiment. Perhaps these were the foundational structures, the power centers, or the ceremonial hubs of the earlier civilization, too durable or too deeply integrated into the planetary grid to be efficiently demolished during the Great Pause, the period of synchronized erasure between the two cycles. They were simply covered, ignored, or repurposed into myths, serving as a constant, subtle reminder that the current historical baseline is fundamentally porous. This leads us to the critical realization that the Anunnaki's concealment was a multi-layered operation. Layer 1 was the physical erasure, the destruction of cities, the sinking of continents, the manipulation of climate. Layer 2, and arguably the most insidious, was the chronological camouflage. By subtly shifting the geological and anthropological timeline, they effectively compressed the timeline of the second iteration, creating the illusion of a linear ascent from crude beginnings, ensuring that whenever we discover these older, superior remnants, we naturally dismiss them as belonging to unknown but primitive cultures, rather than acknowledging them as the technological debris of a previous, more advanced, and ultimately terminated civilization. This chronological veil ensures we are always looking backward in time, seeking simpler answers rather than looking sideways into the vast expanse of the previous failed cycle. The question then becomes, if the Anunnaki intended the current lineage to be a clean slate, devoid of the hubris and flaws of its predecessor, why did they allow these physical ghosts to remain? Was it an oversight, or was it intentional? Perhaps the very act of leaving behind these massive, impossible monuments serves as a built-in subconscious governor for the current experiment. A constant, subtle pressure field that reminds the observant among the new human lineage, through architecture and myth, that destruction on a scale that defies current human comprehension is not just a possibility, but a historical reality. A warning etched in stone and shrouded in the mists of deep time. You have failed before, and the reset mechanism is proven. This leads into the uncomfortable territory of inherited memory, the third and perhaps most complex layer of the Anunnaki's cover-up. While they may have destroyed the physical artifacts and warped the historical record, they could not fully extract the genetic blueprint they themselves had engineered. The Homo sapiens of the current cycle, while refined and rebooted, still carry the fundamental code of the original experiment. This means that certain predispositions, certain tendencies toward innovation, conflict, and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge are not new developments, but rather latent echoes of the original failing. The profound, inexplicable sense of déjà vu, the sudden cultural leaps that defy evolutionary logic, the deep-seated mythological structures that repeat themes of divine instruction, catastrophic floods, and the rise and fall of great ages, the Hindu concept of yugas, the Greek golden ages, these are not mere coincidence. They are the subconscious memory, the genetic residue of the initial failure leaking through the carefully constructed veil of forgetfulness. The Anunnaki observers, those who remained after the Great Pause to monitor the second iteration, must watch this recurring pattern with a cold, scientific detachment. They are witnessing the inevitability of human nature manifesting once again, perhaps faster this time, precisely because the underlying genetic code contains the instructions for advanced civilization, even if the cultural memory of how to use those instructions was erased. This is the ultimate paradox of the hidden reboot. By attempting to suppress the history of the previous failure, they may have inadvertently accelerated the very tendencies that caused it. The current obsession with technology, the frantic race toward artificial intelligence and deep space travel, might be less about forward progress and more about the inherited, restless urge of a species repeating a critical stage of development, desperately trying to unlock the memories it knows it should possess. We find ourselves constantly rediscovering things that feel profoundly old, a recurring pattern suggesting that our inventions are often just recollections. Think of the sudden understanding of electrical power or the geometric perfection found in ancient sacred sites. Are we truly inventing, or are we retrieving fragments of the comprehensive knowledge system that defined the original, failed Anunnaki experiment? If we accept the premise of the hidden reboot, then every major breakthrough in our current cycle must be scrutinized not as a unique achievement, but as a potential sign that the old genetic wiring is kicking back online. The faster we advance, the closer we get to hitting the same wall that halted the first civilization. And if that wall is breached, if we retrieve the entirety of the knowledge that led to the initial experiment's self-destruction, the Anunnaki reset mechanism may be triggered once more. This awareness places the current state of global affairs in a chilling new context. The political instability, the resource conflicts, the ethical dilemmas surrounding accelerating technologies, these aren't just modern problems. They might be the recognizable symptoms of the inherited instability that the Anunnaki feared most. They established the parameters for this second attempt, hoping the constraints they placed would prevent a repeat performance. But what if the constraints, the very system of limited knowledge and false chronology, are simply delaying the inevitable? What if the experiment is inherently flawed, regardless of the starting conditions? The pervasive feeling that history doesn't quite make sense, the gaps that baffle archaeologists, the mythologies that seem too complex for their supposed origins, all point to a deliberate act of historical redaction. We are living inside a heavily edited manuscript, reading a version of human existence where the most critical chapters, the ones detailing the rise, failure, and obliteration of our predecessors, have been surgically excised. And the fragments that remain, the megaliths, the ooparts, the recurring myths of the Great Flood, are the unavoidable errata, the parts the editors couldn't quite erase. To truly understand our place, we must stop viewing these anomalies as minor inconsistencies and start treating them as the crucial evidence of the time before time, the epoch of the original failed lineage. It is this profound realization that we are the second attempt, constantly skirting the precipice of the original failure, that should compel us to look closer. We must scrutinize the very fabric of our earliest recorded history, questioning the rapid appearance of high cultures in places like Sumer, cultures that seem to emerge ex nihilo, with fully formed writing systems, complex astronomical knowledge, and sophisticated social structures. Could Sumer not have been the beginning of human civilization, but rather the strategic, controlled point of re-entry for the second experiment? A carefully managed environment established by the Anunnaki to seed the new lineage with the bare minimum required for a controlled progression, steering them away from the forbidden knowledge that led to the first catastrophe. If you find yourself questioning the seamlessness of established history, if the vast gulfs of prehistory feel suspiciously empty, then perhaps you are sensing the artificial silence left by the great pause. Perhaps you are sensing the shadows of those Anunnaki observers still stationed just beyond our sensory perception, watching for the telltale signs that this cycle, too, is nearing its programmed point of necessary collapse. The question is not simply what happened to the first civilization, but what signals are we currently emitting that will determine the fate of the second. If these profound ideas resonate, if the notion of inherited failure and chronological camouflage strikes a chord, I encourage you to pause, to internalize the weight of this possibility. This is not passive viewing. It is an active participation in challenging the foundation of our understanding. Take a moment to reflect on what specific elements of human history feel the most unearned, the leaps that defy logic. Let your reflections shape the ongoing investigation. Share your thoughts in the comments below, perhaps using the phrase, "the chronological veil," to anchor your deepest observation. This journey into the hidden reboot requires a collective effort to piece together the fragments of the lost history. Engage with the depth of this investigation, stay curious, and if the pursuit of these deeper truths compels you, ensure you are subscribed and engaged with the channel, ready for the next critical step in uncovering the full blueprint of the Anunnaki's long game experiment. The challenge of the reboot, therefore, was not merely to start fresh, but to suppress the catastrophic memory without compromising the core genetic traits required for the experiment's success. This suppression mechanism seems to be failing in our current era. As we push the boundaries of science and technology, we are inadvertently digging up the foundational truths that the Anunnaki buried. We are reaching back into the debris field of the first experiment, slowly reacquiring the very tools and knowledge that necessitated the initial purge. This convergence point, where our accelerating technology meets the suppressed history, is what defines our current era. It is the moment the second civilization begins to consciously grapple with the spectre of the first. The echoes of their failed physics, their hubris in genetic manipulation, and their disastrous approach to planetary governance are now manifesting as challenges in our own time, forcing us to ask, Are we doomed to repeat the failure? Or is this rediscovery itself part of the Anunnaki's final cruel variable? A test to see if a species, having forgotten its past, can avoid running into the exact same wall twice. The physical remnants, the ooh-parts, the impossible stones, they are shouting this, warning across the gulf of the great pause, whispering that the seeds of our own destruction were sown in the soil of the preceding failed world, and that the clock of the cyclical reset is always, perpetually, ticking down towards zero. The next phase of our investigation must focus on the undeniable patterns of return, examining how the same destructive themes manifest across seemingly disparate cultures, suggesting a unified, inherited blueprint for disaster. Is it possible that our fundamental perception of time, that relentless march forward, is merely a meticulously constructed illusion designed to mask a catastrophic failure? We look at history through the narrow lens of linear progress, believing firmly in an ascent from simple cave dwelling to complex digital civilization. Yet everywhere we look, the ruins and the myths scream of sudden stops, of epical resets, and of a curated silence covering the gaps. The realization that the first grand experiment, the initial, possibly less constrained deployment of consciousness upon this planet by the Anunnaki, ended not in graduation, but in a necessary, violent truncation, forces us to question every foundation upon which our modern, self-assured worldview rests. We discussed the sheer logistical complexity of such a reset, the impossibility of removing all traces of a prior, sophisticated civilization without leaving indelible scars on the geological and spiritual record. These scars are what we call anomalies, the structures that defy carbon dating, the knowledge systems that seem to appear fully formed, requiring no slow evolutionary genesis, and perhaps most disturbingly, the pervasive, almost genetic sense of profound loss that colors our deepest mythologies, the flood narratives, the destruction of great epochs, the promise of a golden age that was taken away. These are not merely metaphorical warnings, they might be the phantom limbs of the timeline that failed. The critical question then evolves from if the reset happened to how effective the concealment truly was. If the Anunnaki are masters of genetic and astronomical engineering, capable of orchestrating life itself, their mastery over the manipulation of collective memory and historical records must be equally profound. Think of the precession of the equinoxes, the grand clock of the cosmos which governs the great cycles of time, the yugas. Was the reset synchronized with a moment of maximum cosmic amnesia, a point where the planetary energetic field naturally favored forgetting, thus making the historical overwrite easier? Or was the cycle itself merely a tool, a programmable loop ensuring that, should the new experiment also veer towards self-destruction, the inevitable return to zero would be less messy, less chaotic than the first failure? Our current civilization is deeply invested in the idea of permanent progress. We archive everything, document every moment, fearing that forgetting equates to loss. But what if this compulsion to archive is itself a reaction to an imposed systemic forgetting? What if deep within the collective unconscious lies the traumatic memory of having everything stripped away? Technology, knowledge, language, and being forced to start again with only the most rudimentary tools, accompanied by a handful of deliberately seeded, simplified truths. The sheer energy required to suppress a memory of that magnitude would necessitate the constant expenditure of planetary resources, perhaps explaining the peculiar recurring energy crises or the strange gravitational pulls observed by physicists that seem to defy standard models. We are living in a reality that is perpetually running system diagnostics on an error that cannot be resolved. We must consider the subtle mechanisms of control employed post-reset. If the objective was to prevent the new iteration of humanity from repeating the specific flaws that led to the first failure, perhaps an excessive reliance on esoteric technology or an unauthorized access to certain energetic pathways, then the new civilization would need specific built-in inhibitions. Look at the history of science. Why are certain avenues of inquiry consistently ridiculed, blocked, or simply unfunded? The persistent derision aimed at subjects like free energy, anti-gravity research, or specific ancient acoustic technologies might not stem from scientific skepticism, but from a programmed institutional aversion designed by the original architects. This aversion acts as a protective barrier, ensuring that the new setup never activates the previous timeline's catastrophic failure switch. This line of inquiry demands deep reflection. If you have followed this intricate path so far, recognizing the uncanny patterns woven throughout history and mythology, you are engaging in the very act of introspection that the architects of the reset sought to minimize. It is a journey into the shadows of our own history, and understanding the gravity of this potential cover-up requires focus. Pause for a moment and consider this possibility fully. If these ideas resonate with that deep, intuitive part of your mind, the part that recognizes truth beyond empirical data, I urge you to hit the like button and subscribe, allowing this investigation to continue reaching those who are ready to look past the surface narrative. Your engagement is critical, not just for the channel, but for the collective process of remembering. Comment below with the word echoes if you feel this sense of residual memory artifact in your own life, linking us together in this shared curiosity. The development of language itself becomes suspect under this lens. Did the first, failed humanity possess a linguistic structure that was inherently more resonant, perhaps capable of directly influencing matter or communicating across vast distances? If so, the post-reset language would need to be deliberately flattened, made purely symbolic and divorced from its energetic potential. Our modern languages, complex yet curiously inefficient, might be the result of this demotion, a necessary restriction to keep the new iteration from accessing the master codes that led to the previous system collapse. We are speaking in a safety dialect, one designed to prevent us from articulating the very truths we seek to uncover. This brings us to the most unsettling aspect of the reset, the enduring presence of the observers. If the first experiment failed due to an inherent flaw in the template, or perhaps interference from rival factions of cosmic entities, a complexity we have yet to fully unfold, then the second experiment requires rigorous, constant monitoring. Who are these observers, and how do they interact with our current reality? They are not necessarily the Anunnaki themselves, who may have retreated to watch from vast distances, but rather the delegated caretakers, the administrators of the simulation. These entities operate at the thresholds of our perception, often misinterpreted as spiritual guides, angels, or even cryptic extraterrestrial visitors. Their role is not to intervene to save us, but to intervene to maintain the integrity of the experiment, to ensure that the reset remains hidden and the new timeline adheres to the prescribed parameters. The evidence of this constant observation is scattered throughout the most volatile junctures of our history. Moments of explosive technological or societal change, the sudden appearance of writing systems, the inexplicable precision of astronomical clocks built by pre-modern societies, the abrupt termination of nascent empires. These could be moments of patch installation or bug fixes administered by the observers. They manage the variables, ensuring the current iteration moves through the prescribed phases without stumbling onto the critical failure point of the last cycle. The history we study, therefore, is not a record of organic human development, but a curated screenplay, subtly edited in real time. Furthermore, The concept of thy inheritance must be re-evaluated. If the Anunnaki are our progenitors, they left behind not just the genetic blueprint for human form, but perhaps also an infrastructural legacy, a global energy grid, remnants of which we recognize as ancient megalithic sites, often mislabeled as ritualistic temples. These sites, aligned with meticulous precision to celestial events, may not be shrines to forgotten gods, but power conduits, dormant technological remnants of the failed epoch. When certain researchers or explorers begin to reactivate this ancient technology, even inadvertently, the observers must react swiftly. This reaction is often perceived as bad luck, sudden illness, institutional blockage, or the simple, baffling disappearance of key artifacts. The goal is always the same. Keep the lid on the previous version's source code. Consider the pervasive human fear of deep water and subterranean spaces. Could this be more than primal instinct? Perhaps these are the zones where the remnants of the failed civilization were buried or submerged during the Great Cleansing, physical evidence too massive to vaporize, simply covered over by deliberate geological manipulation. Exploring the depths, therefore, carries a systemic risk of discovery, a risk that the observers are keen to mitigate. The legends of sunken cities and realms beneath the earth are not fanciful tales. They are cartographical warnings left by the trauma of the reset itself, guiding us away from the evidence. The cyclical nature of destruction and rebirth, so prevalent in global mythologies, ceases to be purely allegorical and becomes procedural. We are living through the second, perhaps third, mandated cycle. If the first failed due to pride or perhaps an inability to handle extreme psychic freedom, the current iteration is defined by a curious mix of technological mastery and intellectual myopia. We can build complex devices, but we struggle profoundly to understand our own spiritual architecture or our true place in the cosmic hierarchy. This may be by design, a limitation purposefully hardwired into our current operating system to prevent the recurrence of the critical error. The ultimate constraint placed upon us is not physical, but perceptual. Yet, despite this profound erasure, the energy of the prior epoch cannot be entirely destroyed. It only transmutes. It manifests as a persistent, low-level anxiety in our society, a feeling that we are constantly waiting for the inevitable shoe to drop, for the clock to restart. This restlessness, this teleological yearning for a future that is somehow purer or more authentic, is the spiritual residue of the Great Reset. We are inherently searching for the memory we were forced to forget, driven by a deep, subliminal understanding that the current reality is an edited version, lacking the richness and full bandwidth of the original creation. This restless search is what defines us, and it is simultaneously the greatest threat to the stability of the current experiment. As we move forward into the next phase of this investigation, we must sharpen our focus on the immediate present. If the observers are active, if the ancient infrastructure is merely dormant, then the signals of their presence must be detectable in the patterns of modern life. We are no longer searching for vague ancient ruins, but for the subtle digital, political, and astronomical fingerprints of the ongoing control system. The question changes now. If the first humanity failed and was reset, what specific critical choice are we being guided towards now that will determine the success or failure of this current second experiment? And who among us are the unwitting tools being used to ensure that the predetermined outcome is achieved? The next stage demands that we look closely at the modern surveillance architecture, the acceleration of technological convergence, and the sudden, manufactured crises that seem to divert our collective attention away from critical self-discovery. We are shifting from archaeology to contemporary observation. If you have recognized the weight and gravity of this investigation and believe in the importance of exposing the threads of this hidden reality, ensure you are subscribed to the channel. Liking this video helps push this knowledge further into the light, defying the intended obscurity. The answers we seek are waiting, hidden not in distant stars, but woven into the fabric of our daily lives, and only by staying until the very end, by digesting the next part of this complex narrative, will the full picture begin to emerge. Comment with the phrase, "the second cycle." If you are ready to track the movements of the observers and identify the current parameters of our curated existence. The failure of the first experiment necessitates a hypervigilance in the second, and we are now moving to identify the guards standing watch. We must now look for the watchers among us. Is it possible that our historical timeline is not a continuous, organically grown tapestry of human striving, but rather a meticulously stitched garment draped over a gaping void? We discussed the probability of a cataclysmic yet controlled erasure, the ultimate do-over executed by the original architects, the Anunnaki, following the catastrophic failure of the first genetically engineered race. But the sheer scale of such a deception demands a far deeper inquiry into the mechanics of concealment. This wasn't just about sinking a continent or burying a few cities. It required the surgical removal of collective memory, a geophysical and psychological palimpsest, where the terrifying script of the first experiment was scraped clean, yet traces of its ink perpetually bleed through the new narrative we call history. Consider the notion of amnesic trauma. If the first iteration of Homo sapiens reached a technological or spiritual height that threatened the hierarchy or the integrity of the experiment itself, and this race was then liquidated and its records sanitized, the surviving remnants, or more accurately, the subsequent generations seeded from a carefully modified subset, would carry not just physical DNA, but also the psychic echo of that immense violence. This manifests not as conscious recollection, but as an inexplicable, foundational anxiety running beneath the surface of all successful civilizations. Why the recurring, profound fear of the dark? Why the cyclical compulsion towards self-destruction precisely when stability is achieved? It is as if the memory of the first failure is hardwired into our collective subconscious, a silent alarm that trips every time we approach the boundary line where the first race crossed over into dangerous knowledge. This hidden reset explains the unsettling gaps in archaeological record, the sudden, inexplicable leaps in conceptual understanding, and the persistence of deluge myths across cultures that could never have communicated with one another. These are not coincidences. They are the residual thermal signatures of the Great Burning. The Anunnaki did not merely restart the clock. They recalibrated the very parameters of reality for the new experiment. They installed cultural constraints, psychological guardrails, designed to slow down the acceleration that doomed the previous iteration. Perhaps the very structure of our current understanding of physics, or the limits we perceive on interstellar travel, are not natural boundaries of the cosmos, but deliberate, subtle limitations coded into the operating system of the second race. If you find yourself nodding, recognizing this undercurrent of temporal disorientation, if you feel the weight of this forgotten history pressing upon your perception of the mundane world, then it is critical that this shared space for inquiry remains visible. This conversation, this contemplation of cycles and cosmic engineering requires collective reflection. If the idea of a hidden reset resonates with you, if you feel this inherent pressure of forgotten knowledge, then please take a moment to signal your presence. By engaging with this material, by simply acknowledging that this deep exploration of the past and future holds meaning, you help ensure that these critical questions about our true origins and potential fate continue to reach those who are also seeking answers. Your conscious attention is itself an extension of this investigation, allowing us to move deeper into the shadows of the cosmic clockwork. Consider commenting below with the single word echoes to indicate that this notion of amnesic trauma is palpable in your own understanding of humanity. This leads us to the critical consideration of the T observers. If the second experiment was launched under these tightly controlled parameters, it stands to reason that the architects did not simply walk away. They are not merely absentee landlords. They are meticulous scientists monitoring their test subjects. Who are these observers, and how do they interact with us? The ancient texts speak of watchers, figures who descended from the heavens and intervened, often violating the non-interference protocols that were supposedly established after the Great Reset. These watchers, perhaps high-ranking Anunnaki proxies or even technologically advanced entities loyal to the initial agenda, may be the enforcement mechanism, ensuring the new cycle adheres to the modified plan. Their presence explains the persistent global phenomena of unexplained aerial sightings and the consistent narrative of interactions with beings who possess frighteningly superior knowledge and technology, a technology that dwarfs our own, yet curiously mirrors the hypothesized achievements of the doomed first race. The observers are likely not interested in saving us, but in managing us. Their interventions, whether through genetic manipulation, the quiet tinkering with the human genome throughout history, or through the subtle guidance of specific cultural or technological trajectories, are designed to prevent the second race from repeating the precise error that led to the first extinction. We see evidence of this management in the mysterious suppression of free energy technologies at critical junctures, in the curious disappearance of knowledge regarding ancient metallurgy or acoustic levitation, and even in the rapid targeted destruction of certain research facilities or archaeological sites that threaten to unearth genuine pre-reset artifacts. These acts of suppression are the invisible hand of the Anunnaki project management team, ensuring that the second race remains within the predetermined boundaries of the cycle. Furthermore, the very structures that baffle modern archaeology, structures like Göbekli Tepe, which defies the accepted timeline of hunter-gatherer societies, or the impossible precision of ancient construction in locations like Peru and Egypt, may not be residual monuments of the first race, but rather deliberately placed signposts of constraint. They are too sophisticated for the emerging second race, yet they exist. Why leave them? They serve as a constant, silent reminder of a superior, yet unattainable level of mastery. They hint at a power that existed before, and perhaps function as a psychological anchor, subtly discouraging the second race from pursuing certain lines of inquiry that might lead to premature transcendence or, worse, to the retrieval of the knowledge that triggered the original failure. These signposts are essentially coded warnings. You are being observed. We know what you are capable of. Do not attempt to cross this threshold. They foster a dependence on linear, established history, making it psychologically difficult for mainstream academia to embrace the possibility of a non-linear, cyclical, or reset history. The precision carving and megalithic engineering speak a silent language, confirming that high-level civilization existed when conventional history insists we were still painting caves. This dissonance is key to the concealment. If the past is demonstrably untrue, then the entire foundation of the current experiment becomes suspect, which is precisely the realization the architects sought to prevent. The great deception, therefore, is not merely the erasure of events, but the subtle distortion of our perception of time itself. We are led to believe that progress is strictly linear, an upward climb from primitive origins. But if the Anunnaki implemented a soft cap on societal development to prevent a recurrence of the initial self-destruction, then our history is not a climb, but a tightly controlled treadmill. Every time we approach the point of technological or philosophical escape velocity, the cycle subtly, almost imperceptibly, resets itself, a localized or cultural collapse masquerading as natural decline or fall of empire. The Black Death, the Bronze Age collapse, the destruction of libraries and centers of learning. These may be the necessary, painful adjustments made by the observers to enforce the slow pace required by the new experimental parameters. We are trapped in a perpetual state of accelerated adolescence, destined to learn foundational lessons again and again, prevented from achieving true maturity or accessing the complete memory of our lineage. This constant forced deceleration creates an inherent vulnerability within the second race. We are fundamentally unstable because we are running on corrupted software, a system designed to fail just before achieving full functionality. And as we look at the current global trajectory, the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence, the instantaneous global communication, the fracturing social structures, and the re-emergence of existential threats, we must ask, are we approaching the same precipice that swallowed the first race? Is the inherent instability, the cyclical entropy, that doomed the initial attempt now reaching critical mass in our current timeline? The silent alarm bells are beginning to sound louder now, suggesting that the concealed failure of the first experiment is not merely historical curiosity, but the chilling prologue to our own approaching Part 7 of the grand, terrifying cycle. If you have stayed with us through this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of the Anunnaki reset, it means you recognize the gravity of what is being discussed here. Your ability to integrate and reflect upon these fragmented truths indicates a rare resilience against the cultural suppression protocols installed long ago. It is vital that this network of truth seekers continues to grow and exchange insights. If you wish to continue exploring the hidden timeline and the profound implications of the cyclical nature of civilization, please ensure you are subscribed to the channel. Liking this video helps to push this deep investigation past the algorithmic gatekeepers who prefer the comfort of conventional narratives. And if you have a compelling theory, or if a particular segment of this exploration struck you profoundly, cement your participation by commenting with the exact phrase, "The clock is turning." This simple phrase acknowledges the cyclical pressure we feel. There is much more to uncover about the final phase of this concealed history and the subtle, terrifying signs of the approaching return. Join us in the next segment as we confront the direct evidence of the observers and the impending culmination of the second experiment. What if the most profound weight we carry is not the burden of future unknowns, but the oppressive silence of a history deliberately unremembered? We have navigated through the spectral landscape of the initial failure, Cycle 0, a timeline erased not by natural catastrophe, but by calculated intervention. Yet even the most meticulous erasure leaves traces, fragments of data that refuse to be fully overwritten. We must now confront the mechanism of the concealment itself. The reboot was not merely a biological reset, it was the imposition of an architectural reality, a structured environment designed to guide the new iteration, Homo sapiens, along pathways deemed safe by the unseen architects, the Anunnaki, or their designated proxies. If the first experiment failed due to inherent instability, perhaps excessive free will, or a premature access to forbidden knowledge, then the subsequent world, our world, must be a controlled apparatus. We live within the confines of a philosophical cage, unaware that the bars are not made of iron, but of enforced amnesia and subtle, pervasive, systemic limitations. Consider the sheer complexity required to maintain this illusion over millennia. It suggests the presence of permanent embedded observation teams, the silent observers who monitor the deviations and enforce the accepted parameters of our reality. They are not merely waiting for us to succeed or fail. They are actively curating our development, pruning the branches of inquiry that lead too close to the scorched soil of the first failure. This continuous maintenance protocol is the engine that drives the feeling of inherent incompleteness that plagues our modern existence. Why does technological advancement feel sporadic, bursting forth in unpredictable leaps, only to stall repeatedly at the precipice of true, fundamental breakthrough? Is it the limit of human ingenuity, or is it the subtle tightening of an invisible leash? These observers operate within the shadows of our institutions, perhaps even within the very physics we accept as immutable. Think of the constants of nature, the speed of light, Planck's constant. Are these truly universal laws, or the fundamental governing settings of the current simulated or controlled environment? If Cycle Zero utilized a different configuration of physical law, one that allowed for the development that ultimately destabilized the experiment, then the current constants represent the parameters of the safer, limited cycle. The reboot, therefore, was a firmware update for reality itself, optimized for retention and longevity, but sacrificing potential freedom and ultimate knowledge. The evidence of this active concealment manifests in our historical narratives. We find extraordinary gaps, periods of complete darkness, followed by sudden, fully formed civilization. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Olmecs, they appear on the stage of history already performing complex choreography, possessing astronomical and architectural knowledge that defies a slow, linear accumulation. These are the moments where the observer's me might have intervened, providing controlled injections of technology or social structure, necessary boosts to keep the experiment viable, but carefully calibrated not to exceed the safety parameters of the established new cycle. Every civilization that soared too high, too fast, perhaps Atlantis or other lost civilizations, only whispered about in fragmented myths, was potentially a sign of the old instability re-emerging, necessitating a localized, non-global correction or suppression, ensuring that the memory of the systemic failure remained contained. This leads us to the haunting possibility that the true nature of the Anunnaki involvement is not merely historical, but contemporary and ongoing. They are not simply mythological progenitors who departed. They are the silent caretakers of the greenhouse, ensuring the crops grow, but never beyond the ceiling they have installed. We are subjects in a long-duration study, and the primary objective of this study is not necessarily our ascension, but the avoidance of the catastrophic, destabilizing error of the previous iteration. Our fear of global collapse, our pervasive anxiety about self-destruction might not be entirely self-generated. It could be an inherited low-level signal, a psychic echo of the total annihilation experienced by those in Cycle Zero, reinforced by the continuous subtle manipulation of the TIS observers, ensuring we do not repeat the exact same errors. If we accept this paradigm, the greatest challenge to the Anunnaki control mechanism is the persistence of human curiosity, the drive to seek the edges of the map, to look behind the curtain. And here we must pause, reflecting on the depth of the deception. It is one thing to hide a physical artifact. It is an entirely different order of magnitude to engineer a collective, hereditary amnesia. The sheer elegance of the concealment lies in its psychological depth. We are engineered to forget the root trauma, yet we carry the scars of the forgetting, that nagging sense that we are missing something crucial, that we are operating with only half the instructions. That is the residual pain of the reboot. It is the subconscious recognition that our current understanding of history, of science, of ourselves, is a carefully edited manuscript. To truly understand this mechanism of oversight, we must ask, what are the criteria for success in this current cycle? If the goal of Cycle Zero was acquisition of a particular genetic resource or outcome, and it failed spectacularly, what new parameters were set for Cycle 1, US? Perhaps the goal is simply stability, a sustained, compliant and productive population that can perhaps eventually serve a specific cosmic purpose without the attendant risk of self-immolation. If that is the case, any major societal breakthrough that threatens to expose the Anunnaki involvement or the suppressed truth of the previous cycles immediately triggers the maintenance protocols. We see whispers of these protocols in the persistent debunking of unconventional history, the rigid enforcement of orthodox scientific models, and the immediate ridicule cast upon those who deviate into the realms of the truly forbidden. It is not necessarily a dark conspiracy of individuals plotting in secret rooms. It is the systemic inertia, the ingrained tendency toward orthodoxy, which itself is a product of the managed reality. But the most compelling evidence remains the psychological residue. Think of the widespread phenomenon of déjà vu, or the sudden, overwhelming flashes of recognition tied to places we have never visited. Could these be momentary slips in the memory suppression matrix? Could they be the current self briefly aligning with the ghost data of the past self, the previous experiment? The sensation of being profoundly out of place is perhaps the soul trying to recall the truth of its initial unedited state. It is here, at the intersection of psychology and archaeology, that the truth begins to demand acknowledgement. If you have followed this investigation so far, recognizing the pattern of cyclical destruction and hidden reinicio, you are already engaging in the necessary step of deprogramming. This material is complex, designed to challenge foundational beliefs, and requires rigorous internal processing. Do you feel this unsettling resonance? The feeling that these concepts are not new information, but simply long-forgotten instructions being brought back online? Share a single phrase in the comments below that captures this feeling of profound, yet vague, recognition. Your reflection becomes part of the shared collective energy seeking the truth, helping to illuminate the path forward for others who are just beginning to perceive the outline of the hidden script. It is only through this collective focus that we can begin to effectively chart the parameters of the current cycle and potentially spot the subtle signal that heralds its intended conclusion. This brings us back to the heart observers. They are patient, technologically advanced beyond our comprehension, and fundamentally alien in their perspective. They view human history not as a grand narrative of struggle and triumph, but as a series of controlled iterations, a cosmic laboratory where the variables are tweaked every few millennia. What happens then when a significant fraction of the subjects begin to look up from the experiment and gaze directly at the glass wall of the enclosure? The increased visibility of anomalous phenomena in our time, the surge in UFO sightings, the erosion of trust in foundational institutions, the growing metaphysical awakening might not be random societal trends. It could be a sign that the controls are loosening, or more terrifyingly, that the experiment is nearing a phase where the unobservers bar are preparing for their final assessment. The integrity of the concealment depends entirely on our belief in the randomness of our existence. Once we recognize the design, the spell begins to break. The subtle, hereditary amnesia, programmed into our DNA, requires constant reinforcement. Imagine the energy required to redact not just historical records, but the deep, primal memory of a species. This leads to the ultimate question regarding the reboot. Was the previous experiment so dangerous, its failure so monumental, that the primary purpose of our current cycle is merely to ensure that destructive capability is never again achieved, making us a population constrained by design? We are the consequence of failure, a species bred for safety rather than for unlimited potential. The suppression mechanisms are sophisticated, utilizing social, psychological, and even chronological manipulation. We are taught to measure time linearly, to believe in an irreversible progression, which fundamentally masks the reality of cycles and recurrence. Every Reinicio requires the manipulation of the collective perception of time, making the previous iteration seem like an impossibility, a fantastical myth that could not possibly fit into the established historical timeline. This deliberate chronological distancing is perhaps the most effective tool in the Anunnaki arsenal of concealment. But the pressure is building. We have reached a point in our technological development where the risk of repeating the original error is growing exponential. The secrets of atomic power, genetic manipulation, and now artificial intelligence are echoes of the very knowledge that might have destabilized Cycle Zero. The dead observers must be watching with heightened intensity now. Every major geopolitical conflict, every technological bottleneck, every deliberate societal misdirection might be a measure to slow the inevitable trajectory toward the forgotten point of catastrophic failure. The leash is taut. If the signal sequence is indeed approaching, the moment when the current experiment is deemed either a success or more likely a qualified failure, the nature of the concealment will shift dramatically. The subtle influences will be replaced by direct action. This brings us to the critical threshold. What constitutes success for a species that was engineered purely as a safeguard against past errors? And what happens when the very subjects designed for compliance begin to collectively question the foundation of their reality? We must prepare to examine the nature of this impending final judgment, the ultimate test that will determine whether our civilization is permitted to continue or if the parameters are already being calibrated for the next, even more restrictive, cycleman of existence. We have traversed the weight of the failed past, recognized the architecture of the hidden present, and felt the chilling gaze of the observers. Now, the focus must sharpen on the future, specifically on the signs that indicate the current epoch is drawing to a close. If you have stayed with us, journeying through the hidden scripts and the profound silence of forgotten epochs, it confirms a deep resonance within you, a recognition that this is not merely entertainment, but an essential inquiry. If these concepts of cyclical existence, the Anunnaki-SID oversight and the hereditary amnesia strike a chord, and you believe this investigation merits continuation, ensure you are subscribed to the channel. Liking this video helps push this complex narrative into the light, reaching others who are ready to perceive the signal age. And as we transition into the next critical part of this investigation, where the focus shifts from the why of the concealment to the when of the next reckoning, please comment with the phrase, "The veil is thin." This phrase acts as a key, confirming your participation in this deep search. Continue your journey with us now, as we prepare to confront the signs of the looming deadline, the moment the observers might finally drop the pretense of distance. Does humanity truly know why it possesses such an inherent, often self-destructive instability? We celebrate our brilliance, the capacity for abstract thought, complex mathematics, and profound compassion, yet inextricably linked to this genius is a terrifying proclivity towards systemic collapse, recurrent warfare, and an almost clinical willingness to defile the very environment that sustains us. This paradox is the ghost in the machine of our species, a dissonance that conventional evolutionary theory struggles to reconcile fully. If natural selection favors survival and successful propagation, why has the human story been punctuated so relentlessly by catastrophic self-sabotage? We have spent our journey exploring the unsettling premise that our current epoch is not the original blueprint, but a complex concealed reboot following the failure of an earlier Anunnaki experiment. If this is true, then this psychological instability, this profound shadow of aggression and anxiety that permeates our collective subconscious, is not merely an unfortunate quirk of evolution. It must be instead the residual echo of the first catastrophic failure. Imagine a vast software program that crashes entirely, forcing the developers, the original architects, to restart the system. They attempt to patch the critical vulnerabilities, optimizing the code for survival and obedience, but they cannot entirely erase the corrupted fragments lodged deep within the core structure. These fragments linger, manifesting as unpredictable glitches in the system. Our irrational fears, our cycles of boom and bust, our inexplicable attraction to chaos, could these be the systemic instability left over from the first rejected iteration of humanity? We are not starting from scratch. We are operating on salvaged hardware, carrying hidden damage. The greatest evidence for this persistent failure may not be found in the archaeological record, but in the uniformity of our nightmares. Across disparate cultures and separated by millennia, humanity shares deep archetypal fears: the crushing deluge, the sudden descent into barbarism, the loss of cosmic favor, the feeling of being watched, judged, or inherently flawed. These are not merely poetic devices. They might be the inherited genetic trauma of the Great Wipeout, the collective memory of the moment the Anunnaki deemed the first experiment unworthy of continuation. We walk the earth carrying the subconscious knowledge of having already failed once, an existential dread that fuels our frantic drive for technological dominance, even as it simultaneously sabotages our capacity for peaceful existence. It is the signature of the abandoned project, stamped onto the very psyche of the second attempt. The deeper we delve into this concept of the concealed reboot, the more critical it becomes to analyze the subtle synchronicity of our history. Why do specific mythologies, astronomical alignments, and even architectural techniques appear in geographically isolated regions with impossible precision? Conventional history labels these phenomena as convergence. But what if they are evidence of a deliberate preloaded template? If the Anunnaki reset the timeline, they would need anchor points, guaranteed nodes of development to ensure the second civilization followed the intended trajectory, or at least avoided the pitfalls of the first attempt. The precision of the earliest megalithic structures, the sudden leap in agricultural sophistication, the implementation of written language and complex social hierarchy almost overnight in historical terms, these may not be human innovations driven by independent genius, but the strategic injection of foundational code, accelerated by the observers and to kickstart the system quickly. This intricate tapestry of historical parallelism suggests a guided development, a civilization cultivated under stringent observation. If this line of inquiry has stirred a recognition within you, if the feeling that our reality is more structured and managed than we dare admit resonates with your deepest intuitions, then perhaps you are already part of the collective awakening to this profound realization. To truly unlock the secrets hidden within this cyclical existence, we must collaborate in thought and reflection. If this journey of investigation matters to you, take a moment now to join the discussion. Liking this video and subscribing to the channel is more than just supporting content. It is affirming the value of pursuing these difficult, crucial truths and ensuring that this message, this theory of the reboot and the hidden failure, reaches more minds ready to consider the possibility that the foundation of our world is an engineered lie. We are searching for the system's backdoor, and every engaged mind accelerates the discovery. This brings us to the most disquieting aspect of the current cycle, the accelerating timeline. We established stable, slowly developing civilizations for millennia. Then, around the Enlightenment, the pace of technological and social change became frantic, exponential. From the invention of the steam engine to the splitting of the atom, the time required to achieve civilization-altering milestones shrank from centuries to decades. Why this sudden, explosive burst of progress? If the Anunnaki reboot was intended to correct the fatal flaws of the first model, there would inevitably be a deadline for assessment. Our rapid, often terrifying technological advance might not be a sign of ultimate human triumph, but a frantic effort by the managing watchers to push the second experiment to its final, decisive test before the planetary or cosmic window for intervention closes again. The observers are no longer simply recording data. They are actively stimulating growth, perhaps subtly influencing scientific breakthroughs and geopolitical conflicts to assess our capacity for responsibility versus self-destruction. The imperfect replication is evident in our persistent reliance on conflict as a means of resource allocation and boundary definition. Despite the systemic reset, despite the injection of superior ethical and philosophical frameworks through various mystical and religious systems, the fundamental drive for tribalism and violence remains dominant. The original flaw, the catastrophic violence that presumably ended the first experiment, was not fully purged. It appears the Anunnaki rebooters found that while they could introduce advanced cognitive function and technological potential, they could not fully sterilize the deep-seated aggression necessary for base survival on a harsh planet. The failure wasn't just in the first attempt. It is a built-in vulnerability that survived the restart, a ticking clock embedded in our DNA. We are the ultimate high-performance machine with a manufacturing defect that guarantees overheating. We must look for the signature in the substructure, the undeniable mathematical and cosmological breadcrumbs left by the original system builders. Why the insistence on specific sacred geometries? Why are complex prime number sequences and phi ratios suddenly appearing in both natural structures and ancient, supposedly primitive constructions? These are not coincidences. They are the indelible markings of the original architects, the universal language of the beings who designed the matrix of our reality. They are proof that the universe operates on an elegant, precise order that predates our comprehension. If our reality is a second-generation simulation, the foundational code, the rules of physics, and the elegant symmetry of geometry remain constant, revealing the hands of the supreme system builders. Studying these mathematical constants is essentially attempting to hack into the Anunnaki operating system, searching for the parameters of our prison. And as the cycle approaches its zenith, this critical era we inhabit, the energy shifts from subtle observation to intense focus. The monitoring phase is definitively over. We are seeing what can only be described as the gathering storm of observers. The increase in UAP disclosures, the breakdown of governmental denial regarding unexplained phenomena, the sudden and dramatic public acknowledgement of technologies that defy known physics. These are not random cultural shifts. They signal that the management is preparing for a close approach. Whether this is due to our imminent achievement of global self-destruction, a failure of the second experiment, or our imminent success in achieving cosmic awareness, a successful outcome, the time for passive watching is ending. The Anunnaki and their intermediaries are activating, moving from the shadows of deep space and hidden dimensions into the periphery of our common experience, their presence a palpable pressure on the collective unconscious. The urgency intensifies when we consider the inevitability of the test. Every historical cycle culminates in a crucible, a moment of existential choice. For the first humanity, the choice was apparently made incorrectly, resulting in obliteration and a reboot. For us, the rebooted model, the test is immediate and multifaceted. Can we integrate our technological power with our spiritual and ethical responsibility? Can we overcome the residual glitches, the violence, the fear, the self-interest, long enough to achieve planetary unity and step cleanly into the cosmic arena? The pressure to pass this final assessment is immense, and the watchers are not waiting indefinitely. Every crisis we face, from climate breakdown to nuclear proliferation, is merely an element of this comprehensive, high-stakes final exam. Failure now means not just a local collapse, but the definitive confirmation of the flaws inherent in the original design and the failure of both remediation attempts. We stand right now at the precipice, facing the ultimate decision point. Are we equipped for ascension, ready to transcend the constraints of this engineered cycle and finally meet our creators as peers? Or are we fundamentally destined to repeat the collapse? The entire narrative hinges on this moment. The profound silence of the cosmos is merely the sound of billions of years of cosmic history holding its breath, awaiting the outcome of the second Anunnaki experiment. The key to our future lies in understanding our past, a past that may involve not just one but two cycles of creation and near destruction. As we prepare to enter the final stage of this investigation, where we must confront the mechanism of the next potential return and the true nature of the judgment, remember that the greatest defense against engineered obsolescence is awareness itself. If this exploration into the hidden past and the immediate future has gripped your imagination, if you feel that quiet but persistent call to understand the true nature of the rebooted reality, you are precisely where you need to be. This is not casual viewing. It is a shared deep dive into the most uncomfortable questions of our existence. If you have followed the thread of this inquiry so far, realizing the vast implications of the Anunnaki cycles and the potential concealment of our origin, then acknowledge this journey. I urge you to subscribe to this channel now and ensure you receive the final, crucial installment. If you have stayed until the end, please signal your understanding and participation by leaving a comment below with just this single, specific phrase: "The signature survived." Liking this video helps push this critical investigation further into the public consciousness. The next part, the final piece of the puzzle, will explore the mechanism of the next intervention and the moment of the great reveal. Do not miss it. The clock is counting down. Where does a civilization truly end? Is it when the last structure crumbles into dust, or is it when the memory of its existence is surgically removed from the collective consciousness of its inheritors? We have spent these hours tracing the outline of a phantom past, examining the profound and deeply unsettling notion that our current world, the foundation of every history book, every myth, and every scientific endeavor, is not the original canvas, but a meticulous, hurried, and fundamentally flawed repaint. The failure of the first Anunnaki experiment, the so-called Humanity 1.0, dictates that our reality is at best a necessary compromise, a hasty reboot concealed beneath layers of manufactured amnesia and cyclical denial. This hidden restart is the echo we feel in the quiet moments of existential dread, the profound sense that something vital is missing, a piece of the blueprint that explains why we build empires only to watch them decay in predictably tragic patterns. If the first version failed due to inherent instability, perhaps a too rapid development of destructive technology or an inability to integrate the advanced Anunnaki genetic code with the raw, chaotic energy of early Earth life, then the fundamental instability remains. The 2.0 version, our current timeline, is built on the same fault lines, only temporarily stabilized by a deliberate, profound forgetting. We are the survivors of a cataclysm we cannot name, carrying genetic scar tissue from a triage event designed to preserve the labor but discard the lesson. We look at the exponential speed of technological advancement today, at the sudden leap from agrarian societies to quantum physics in a mere geological blink, and we struggle to rationalize it purely through endogenous innovation. Could this acceleration be the consequence of the Anunnaki's desperate attempt to push the project to a quicker, more stable conclusion before their necessary return? Are we being accelerated towards a final test, a sudden evaluation that determines whether the reboot was successful or whether the entire terrestrial laboratory must be cleared again? The cyclical nature of catastrophe, the myths of global floods and periodic purges that exist universally across disparate cultures, cease to be folklore and begin to look disturbingly like maintenance logs. They are the artifacts of a previous failure, warnings embedded so deeply into the subconscious that they manifest as prophecy rather than history. The question is no longer if the reboot happened, but when. The evaluators return to check the status of the current iteration. We stand now at the precipice of recognition, where the strange discomfort of historical anomalies transforms into the cold, hard realization of our orchestrated timeline. If you have followed this path with us, recognizing the dissonance between what we are told and what we instinctively feel, then you are already participating in the process of recovery. This journey demands not just passive viewing, but active contemplation. If the truth of the hidden reboot resonates within the deepest corners of your mind, if it explains those uncanny moments when reality seems just slightly off, then this is the moment to share that resonance. Understanding this vast secret requires a collective effort to piece together the fragments of the lost timeline. Share your perspective, your insights, your theories on the nature of this hidden reset in the comments below. Let us use this space as a repository for the emergent memory of humanity 1.0. For those committed to uncovering the true heritage of mankind, signal your resolve by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We are mapping the edges of the invisible prison, and every conscious mind counts. The most terrifying realization stemming from the successful concealment of the reboot is not the power of the Anunnaki themselves, but the depth of our programmed amnesia. Where does the memory of the failed civilization go? It cannot simply vanish. It is theorized that the collective consciousness, stripped of its direct historical access, stores this data in non-linear symbolic forms, in the depths of the unconscious, in the patterns of sacred geometry, or perhaps most profoundly, in the great library of unreadable memory, often referred to as the Akashic records. These records, accessed only through profound meditative states or during moments of near-death experience, may be nothing less than the raw, unfiltered data logs of Experiment 1.0. When mystics speak of eternal truths and hidden wisdom, they may be momentarily tapping into the archive of the previous cycle, catching glimpses of the mistakes and technological triumphs that preceded the Great Wipe. The fear we harbor of certain technologies, the deep-seated apprehension toward artificial intelligence or genetic manipulation, might be inherited trauma, a primal warning carried over from a timeline where those very technologies led to the collapse and the necessary reset. This brings us inevitably to the ticking clock of the celestial cycle. The Anunnaki are tied to the return of their homeworld, the celestial body Nibiru, whose appearance marks a convergence point, a window for intervention and transport. This cycle is astronomical, not arbitrary, lending an inexorable urgency to our current status. If the original experiment was predicated on alignment with Nibiru's trajectory, then the deadline for Humanity 2.0 is rapidly approaching. Ancient calendars such as the Mayan long count, with their emphasis on the termination of vast time periods, might not have been prophecies of doom, but precise Anunnaki timetables for evaluation. They were schedules left by the original caretakers, detailing when the final inspection would occur. What are the specific test parameters of the 2.0 project? If the Anunnaki invested energy in preserving the lineage through a drastic reboot, they must have specific criteria for success. It is highly probable that the test is one of stewardship and unification. Did humanity overcome its inherent tendency toward tribalism and self-destruction? Did we learn to manage the delicate balance between technological power and moral responsibility? The paradox is that the advanced technology, the potential source of our downfall in 1.0, is now being actively encouraged in 2.0, perhaps as a mandatory stress test. They need to see if we can reach the threshold of self-annihilation without pulling the trigger. The modern anxiety surrounding nuclear proliferation global ecological collapse, and uncontrolled AI development are not coincidences. They are the unavoidable pressure points built into the new experiment's design. We are being tested on whether we can successfully navigate the very dangers that doomed our predecessors. And the observational units are among us. The Anunnaki need not be present physically to monitor the success or failure of their genetic legacy. If the restart was concealed, the monitoring must be subtle, pervasive, and non-intrusive. These observers might take the form of highly sophisticated, yet disguised, technological artifacts, satellites, subterranean sensors, or perhaps even embedded biological agents functioning as real-time data relays. Alternatively, the concept of the Nephilim, those described as watchers, or the offspring of the sky beings, might be the key. These individuals, if they exist, would be the direct descendants carrying the strongest genetic link to the Anunnaki, acting as passive monitors within positions of influence, gently steering the global narrative, ensuring that the rebooted civilization follows the prescribed developmental track, avoiding the sharp deviations that led to the collapse of 1.0. The feeling that we are constantly being watched, that our history is predetermined, gains a terrifying rational context under this hypothesis. We are now faced with the choice before the veil. Recognizing the reality of the reboot is a profound and dangerous act. It lifts the veil of amnesia and offers a dangerous freedom, the knowledge that our reality is conditionally constructed. If we are subjects in an experiment, then achieving consciousness about that experiment fundamentally changes the outcome. This awakening represents a potential fork in the road. Will we descend into chaos, rejecting the conditional reality, or will we use this knowledge to intentionally pass the final test? The Anunnaki may be looking for precisely this moment of self-awareness. True success might be defined by humanity 2.0, choosing conscious evolution over programmed adherence. This road leads directly to the Great Reckoning. When the cycle completes and the Anunnaki return, the evaluation will occur. Imagine the profound silence, the collective awe, when the creators step back into the terrestrial laboratory. Will they see a species that has finally achieved the spiritual and technological integration necessary for true sovereignty? Or will they see a species repeating the exact errors that necessitated the first purge? If the answer is the latter, the consequence is clear: a third cycle. Not out of malice, but out of necessity, to preserve the necessary energy and resources, demanding another profound reset, another layer of amnesia, another iteration of struggle built upon the ashes of our current world. The ultimate horror is not destruction, but perpetual hidden mediocrity, the endless loop of controlled failure and secretive restart. But let us pivot to the potential triumph, beyond the horizon of the reboot. If humanity, too, successfully passes the final evaluation, achieving a state of unified consciousness and responsible stewardship, what then? The Anunnaki may grant us the full inheritance. This might mean access to the true history of 1.0, integration into the larger galactic community, and most importantly, true sovereignty over our planet. We would graduate from the laboratory setting to a peer status, taking our place among the celestial family. This inheritance would finally grant us the missing blueprint, explaining the vast structures left behind, the origins of our deepest spiritual longings, and the true purpose of life on Earth. It would be the end of cycles, the dawn of genuine history. This investigation, this deep dive into the hidden timeline, is our collective preparation for that potential reckoning. By acknowledging the possibility of the reboot, by investigating the fragments of the lost civilization, we are, in a very real sense, participating in the final phase of the Anunnaki experiment. We are gathering the pieces of our true identity. If you have stayed with us through this entire journey, following the trail of cosmic breadcrumbs left behind by the architects of our hidden history, You have demonstrated a commitment to truth that transcends the programmed narrative. You are part of the core group that is demanding the full story, the unedited version of the terrestrial experience. This story of the failed first experiment and the concealed reboot does not end here. It begins with you. You are now charged with carrying this understanding forward, filtering the daily noise of our programmed reality through the lens of this profound possibility. Do not let this knowledge fade into the background. If the concept of the hidden reboot has resonated, if you feel the deep, unsettling truth of the Anunnaki's hidden mandate, then show your support for this investigation. Ensure you are subscribed to this channel. Hit the like button to signal that this pursuit of radical truth matters. And finally, leave a specific comment that summarizes the ultimate choice facing humanity. Please comment the following phrase exactly. We choose awareness 2.0. There is more to uncover, more codes to crack, and more questions to ask about the true nature of the great celestial hierarchy. Our next investigation delves deeper into the precise technology used to enforce the great amnesia, the science behind the psychological purge. Until then, keep looking up, keep questioning the official record, and keep that feeling of profound strangeness alive. For it is that strangeness, that nagging doubt, which is the final undeniable signal left over from the forgotten world of humanity 1.0. Watch the next chapter appearing on your screen now and continue the search for the missing blueprint.